I'd like to welcome our first speaker of the day, Dr. Maria Hadjifrangiskou. She is an associate professor in urology as well as in the Department of Pathology, Microbiology, and Immunology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. She is also the associate director for the Vanderbilt Institution for Infection, Immunology, and Inflammation. Her work focuses on determining how uropathogenic E. coli is able to form biofilms within bladder cells and identifying these mechanisms needed for therapeutic intervention. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll go ahead and turn things over to you now.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me all well? I can have an emoji with thumbs up while I'm sharing screen. Great. And now the obligatory, can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So I'm thrilled to give presentations about the work we do, but Chris today asked me to talk a little bit about how to give an effective presentation. So Nathan and I talked a little bit about how we'll structure today's session, and I'm going to go more into depth about how to set up an effective oral presentation, from preparing slides to conquering nerves. And then Nathan will cover a little bit on a very important subject, which is how to deal with the different mics and sound and how to make the entire experience pleasant to you and to the audience. And I like this to be conversational, so please, at any point, if you want to ask questions during the presentation, please feel free. So all of us give presentations for presenting our work or for lecture purposes, so it's important to start with what is the most critical thing to remember when we when we're preparing our work for presentation. First and foremost is to know our audience, right, and present for them. So sometimes, like, I'm a bacterial pathogenesis person, so if I present at the bacteriology meeting, I do not have to go into depth about bacterial physiology. So I can start my presentation right off the bat, going to the point. But if I'm in a different setting, like at a urology session, I have to plan ahead and make sure that what I present can actually be accessible to the broader audience. So that's very important. The other important thing, this is, again, I've structured this for the trainees in the audience. Clarity is key. Be clear and to the point. State up front what you've learned and restate at the end of your slide, at the end of the presentation of the work, because you need to keep the audience with you. So this is not a mystery movie. Just state up front what these slides showing us, and then you engage the audience with how you got there. And most importantly, stay on time. Nobody wants to stay over to hear us finish, so plan ahead. If you have 20 minutes, then the presentation should be close to 17-18 to allow for time for questions, of course. And throughout the presentation, I will have not to-dos in orange and to-dos in black. So know your audience and present for them. Regardless of the expertise of the audience, keeping it simple is key, right? So do not overload the audience. Like if you're a postdoc or a graduate student, I've been there, we've done so many experiments and the majority of them are going to be in a supplementary figure, right? So you don't have to show all of it in one slide. Show the main point and then the single most experiment that got there. And if you need, you can have hidden slides, and if asked a question, then you can find it real quick or unhide it and show the information. But you simply don't have time to show everything that you've done in the lab to support a specific point you're making. Do not overuse acronyms. So many times we all do these, we're all guilty. It's much easier for somebody to follow you if you refrain from using many acronyms. And this is super key. again, each slide should have a title that conveys the single most important take-home message that you're about to present, because you have to be able to speak to the back of the room, right? Whether you're in a virtual audience or an in-person audience, everybody should be able to get the take-home message. So you should have that up there in the title. Don't just have like data or urinary tract infections. Just have the statement of what you're showing in that presentation. So I'm having some examples here just to show, like, for example, one of the areas we're studying is, like Dr. Autumn said, biofilm formation during urinary tract infection. Here's a slide that I've used recently to show that a particular mutant has impaired ability to form biofilms inside urothelial cells. So I like to have big panels so that the back of the room can see them, and I don't have much on the slide so that I can have time to explain what we're seeing. This is a confocal laser scanning micrograph. It indicates the bladder epithelial cells using actin staining in purple. Bacteria are carrying a green fluorescent protein, and they're stained green, and I have them big enough with a big enough font for everyone to see them, even at the back of the room. And then I utilize advancing addition onto the slides to introduce the enumeration so that, again, the audience can actually follow what I'm showing. This allows also for time to describe what the figure is showing or what the graph is showing. If you're having a graph, yeah, you know it, you've created it, but the audience has to know as well. So take-home messages here, describe what the axes are. We're measuring here colony-forming units per bladder organ. Each dot is a mouse. What does each color represent? 3 different bacterial strains introduced into mice. What statistical analysis was used? Here we're using Mann-Whitney, and I always tell my trainees it's great also for publication work and rigor and reproducibility to have the number of animals used, in this case, how many times the experiment was done, and then offer also the statistical analysis. This is great not just for presentation purposes orally, but also when you use these and leverage them for figures for a poster or for a publication or for a grant submission. So it's sort of like kills many birds with one stone. Less is more. Don't overcrowd the slides. We've all done it. I'm guilty. I've done it many times. I get uber excited and I just cram everything again a student has put in a slide. Nobody can hear you and read at the same time. You also have to make things very tiny, and sometimes, that can impede from the ability to send the take-home message to the back of the room. So if you make a slide like this, I've done it many times, step back, look at it. Do I convey the message? Start editing, and then you can find more effective ways to bring up all the points you tried to make in one busy slide. So no more than 3 to 4 bullets per slide is typically the max. Fonts, at least 24, so that people, again, at the back of the room can see it. Be consistent. If you choose a font, if you choose a color palette, use it throughout the presentation. It's easy, it allows for cohesion, and people can continually follow you. It's very, very important. Again, like being able to read what you have on your slide is very important. So err for bigger images, like compare these to this one here. Yes, they're both visible, but if you're at the very back, some details like the scale bar here can actually be missed. If you have microscopy images, I really like the black background. We have a lot of imaging in our work, and it just makes things look seamless if we drop it on a black background. And I'm glad that Nathan agrees with this too, and he had it too when we met. Look at the difference, right? There it is in white. Here it is in black. They're the same images. It just looks much better, much seamless when you do these things. And of course, to do all these, guys, you have to start early. So you have an invitation for a talk, you have a seminar to give, start early, because these little minutia takes a lot of time to finesse prior to the presentation. And the earlier you get it done, the more time you have to relax and practice things like transitions. Transitions are key. So I don't want anybody to practice their presentations to the point where there is rehearsed tones. You have to just know what to say for each slide and just practice how you're going to go from one slide to the next. Banner questions are usually a very good way to transition. It reminds you what's coming next, because, we were chatting with Nathan yesterday about this. We are in a virtual world now. We can have presenter mode, we can have our iPads, but in person, you don't have things like that standing on a podium. And we're going to go back to that hopefully soon, right? So use techniques that will allow you to seamlessly move from one subject of the presentation to another. And using these banner questions are easy. And you don't have to use my cookie colors or any colors at all, but having a banner or a conclusion that comes up sets the next slide up very well. The other thing that's very, very cool, and it's really also important for poster presentations, is the use of cartoons and models. So here I'm using a model because we're preparing this for a submission to a journal, and as you all know, graphical abstracts are a thing, right? So if you're preparing these cartoon slides, you can use them for presentations, you can use them to begin a graphical abstract, you can use them for a synopsis or a conclusion for your poster. And you can, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So having them ties the talk together, sets up again for future directions. You can go back to it and point, here, like we can talk about how we think the bacteria remodel metabolism in the bladder epithelial cells, and we add to the model and subtract based on our findings. So taking the time to prepare these kinds of slides can help you both in presentations as well as for future submissions, again, grants, etc. Now, this is something that when I was in graduate school, we never even were told, right? We did not discuss it, but it's important. 8% of men and 1% of women are colorblind. So think about that when you use your color palette. So I'm using this burnt orange here because it's actually visible to the different types of color blindness that's out there. And I've added here a link for those of you who are interested. This is a website that gives you suggestions of color palettes that can actually be adapted for the different types of colorblind people that you may have in the audience. This is important for grants as well. You may have a colorblind reviewer, and if they can't tell apart what you are trying to convey in a figure, they might get frustrated, and that unconscious bias might pop up and your score might worsen. So those are things that we kind of were not thinking about before, but it is really important also for inclusion, right? To have these considerations. So that's something I'd like to bring up here. And we all are nervous. Like I was nervous doing this because I'm not a presentation maker by trade. I'm a bacterial pathogenesis person, right? So we all have nerves, and we have to have a way to conquer them. And the biggest thing, of course, is to be prepared. Prepare your presentation ahead of time. Go back, edit, make sure everything looks the same. It doesn't look super frill. You're the expert. You know your stuff. You don't have to rehearse to the point of sounding practiced, but know what you want to convey for every single slide that you have on your presentation. And of course, you are excited about it. Show excitement, but again, stay in that nice middle ground. You don't want to sound like you don't want to be there, but you also don't want to overpower the crowd with super enthusiastic, enormous gestures. We've seen people do that, right? Practice your transitions ahead of time again, but don't memorize precise words, because again, if you forget what you wanted to say there and you were memorized, you could have moments of like, what was I gonna say here? And that can be awkward, right? And the rule of thumb is to spend about 1 minute per slide, and that's why less is more, right? If you have an allotted time, if you have fewer things to discuss, you're going to do a better job pacing yourself and also provide sufficient information without rushing through results that are important but may be glossed over because you rush to go to the next slide because you're running out of time. And then for your Q&A, you have to listen attentively to each question, right? If you are not sure, restate it for clarity and for that person at the back of the room. And again, allow time for your to prepare your presentation. And while you're doing that, consider some questions that might be asked of you. And it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay, especially for graduate students, if there are in the audience, you're not supposed to know everything, right? I mean, I don't know everything. Sometimes I was like, oh, I don't know, I haven't thought of that. It's okay to say that. And thank your audience, be grateful of the opportunity and the time. And I think that was it. That's all I had. I'm going to stop sharing. I think I was right at 20 minutes, yay. And see if anyone has any questions before we turn it over to Nathan.
Well, I have one question. What are your thoughts on using pattern backgrounds? Do they add value to the presentation, or are they more of a distraction?
That's an excellent question. So, you don't have to use everything that PowerPoint has, right? So there's a lot of different designs and patterns. I prefer plain backgrounds because I want the crowd to focus on what I want to show them. So I prefer to not have patterns at all. Like I just like plain white or plain black. It just distracts. And if you are if you're wondering, right, put your text and add the pattern and remove it and see what do I like best. It's kind of like when you go to the eye doctor, right? Is this better or is this better? And then that will let you choose. Did I answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. We have another question from Dr. Peniston. How do you feel about and utilize animations?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So if you don't mind me, I can actually share screen again and show you what I've done. And actually we were talking about this with Nathan. It's Nathan's trick that we both utilize. So animation is great as long as it's not overdone, right? So you can add animation to keep your audience with you, but the way you add animation it can be achieved in two different ways, right? You can have a slide that has the animation feature and then you have to add on, and that can be hard to follow if you share the slides. Or you can do this sort of progressive addition and you have more slides, but you actually achieve the same thing. So if you guys can see my screen here, this is my presentation. So the first 3 slides is the same thing, but instead of adding animation, Chris, we're just adding consecutive points. And you see them, the audience views it as animation, right? So if I go here and I zoom in, I move to the next slide and the next slide, and it comes off as animation, right? So I like to use that quite a bit because, again, like Nathan mentioned this as well, if you are to share these slides with the audience, then they see the progression as opposed to seeing a mush of things that you've added via animation.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I started doing this years ago because I've always been a Mac user, and there was a time when PowerPoint did not work and play well with each other. And the one thing that didn't work and play well was fonts and animations. And so I got so sick of having my presentations fall completely to shreds that this was the means to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it still scares me to death, even though I know it's probably not going to happen anymore. I'm still like, this is going to be that one time where I load this on some like crap XP computer and it all explodes.
Yeah.
Certainly. All right. Well, are there any other questions for speaker? All right. Well, we'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker. Let's see. And again, if you have any questions throughout this, please feel free to leave it in the chat box. But our next speaker is Dr. Nathan Tykocki. He is an assistant professor at Michigan State University, where his work focuses on determining the role of TRPV1 in stress-induced bladder dysfunction, as well as determining how bladder blood flow impacts the bladder function normally and in the context of diabetes. So thank you, and you can take over from here.
Awesome. Yeah, everybody can see my screen, as it were. Somebody say yes, because I closed all the other stuff. Great, awesome, thank you. So yeah, I'm coming at this from a different tack, and it's helping out with something that we'll all have to experience again when we're not sitting at our computers like this anymore. And that's how to use the technology that goes with talks. So why am I here talking about this? So when I'm not here in the lab, this is often my seat. I do live sound engineering for theater. I've done it for about 25 years, where I strap microphones to people all over the place and have them perform. This is from a cast of hairspray, and I had so many microphones, I had to have 2 soundboards to do it. The other reason I'm here to talk about this is because if I'm not behind the stage, I'm on it. So I've been, I'm not just the owner, I'm also a client kind of thing. I use these techniques in a lot of different places. And so here's what I want to kind of go over today. First, all about microphones, how you use them and how they can make or break your talk, especially in big meetings. And then the last thing, lasers and laser pointers. And I have a whole lot of very strong feelings about those that we'll talk to you about in the end. So here's big takeaways up front. If you do it right, audio reinforcement, notice I didn't say amplification, it's reinforcement, is your best friend, even in small rooms. The best talk in the world, if can't be understood, is the worst talk in the world. You have to also realize that you cannot talk quietly no matter what you hear. You have to speak at that microphone and not into it. And you will always end up hearing yourself like an echo. If you can't, then you are speaking too quietly. And if there is feedback, which all of us have been around to experience, it's your fault. Sorry. A microphone can only ever be turned down, not up. There is a limit to the top. There is no limit to the bottom. Also, this is a takeaways up front about the laser pointer. If you can, avoid it. Make emphasis part of the slide, and the transitions that we just talked about is a great way to do it, especially in today's age where many more times when you're giving presentations at universities and so on, you're presenting on really big TVs where laser pointers don't work because they're not reflective. If you have to use a pointer, highlight something once, don't paint. Hold on, I think I can make like a pseudo laser pointer here, right? With my screen, make it a dot somewhere. Oh, subtitles are a terrible idea. Doesn't matter. Anyway, you don't have to like do this, like you've seen it all, right? If you can, of people taking you through, emphasis should be part of the slide. Don't point things, just make it there. People can read, it's distracting. Make it bold, make it colorful. And as I said, use transitions and not animations. So, all right, the microphone. I want you all embrace the microphone, be one with the microphone. And sorry to burst all of your bubbles. So this is for senior people as well as junior people. Unless you're that guy, oh, God rest him, Pavarotti. Unless you're a professional opera singer, you need a microphone, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. And as you can see, even professional opera singers do sometimes too. When you answer the question, can everyone hear me okay without a mic? No. The only people that can hear you okay without a mic are you and the people right immediately in front of you. The answer to everyone else is no. They cannot hear you as well as they can hear you with a microphone. And here's why. There's an inverse square law for sound. All it means is every time the distance doubles, you lose 6 decibels. We're gonna use this graph over here. So at 0 feet, you're a garbage disposal, right? 80 decibels, that's damaging to your hearing for extended periods of time. You move 16 feet away from that stage, you are now at normal ambient noise, which isn't conversation, it's just normal background. Past that, it gets even worse. So you have now become the background noise 16 feet away, and you started off like this. So unless you scream like a badger the entire time, you won't be heard at the back of a big room without a mic. But everybody's scared of them. And here's the reason why I think they're kind of scary. You always hear yourself, but it's in delay, right? It sounds just a split second after you actually hear it in your head. Also, they're scary because most of you have never had anybody talk to you the way that I am and trying to tell you how to use these mics. They just hand it to you and say, here, or stick it in front of you. But there are right and wrong ways to use every different kind of microphone you'll hit. And you've also probably seen microphone use go terribly awry at meetings, like I said, about feedback and all of these other things. You've seen this happen badly more times than you've seen it go well, for sure. So here's how to take that scary microphone and make it your friend. As with everything, you have to practice. You need to practice with somebody in a room. This room, another room, you rarely get a chance to practice in the room you're speaking at in a big hall. Once you've kind of done that once, you get a feel for that echo and what it sounds like. And you need someone to sit there with you and go to the back of the room and hear what it is when you're sounding good and know what that sounds like. It doesn't sound like what you think sounds good. There's a very particular way that it's going to hear. Like I said, you're going to hear yourself bounce off the back wall. It never sounds good to you, but that doesn't mean it doesn't sound good to the presenter. You need to learn that difference. Again, your maximum volume in is the maximum volume out. There's only so much one can amplify. So you have to put good quality sound into your microphone and speak as though it isn't there. It only picks up what you put into it. And as a sound guy, please don't tap on the things. Please, never, don't ever do it. It's a great way to blow an amplifier, and that just makes it worse. So just speak into it if you need to know if it's on. Speak into it like you would if it were off, and then you'll know real quick, and your sound engineer won't freak out at the back of the big room. The other thing I want you to take home is that every single microphone, this is, if you really want to get into it, these are all different patterns. Every microphone has a pattern it picks up, and that's the arc of where it is. Almost all the microphones you've ever used look like this. They have a heart-shaped pattern, a cardioid pattern. What that means is the only thing the microphone hears is what is right in the top of it. Every once in a while you run into these. This is kind of what you have when you have like a big teleconference table in the middle. But almost always are these cardioid mics. That means where you have to speak is the top of it, and you have to speak right into it. So now I'm going to talk about all the different kinds of mics you're going to run into. And the easiest one, this is, if you're a sound person, the SM58. This is the most indestructible microphone ever made. It hasn't changed its design in 50 years. When you're using a handheld mic, if you can, hold it. It is a handheld mic, that is its name, so hold it in your hand. What you want to do is you want to put it just about at your chin, right about here, just under your bottom lip, and talk over the top of it. Do not point it toward the speakers. Do not speak into the side of it. Remember that heart-shaped pattern. It doesn't hear very well on the sides. Because it hears really well on the top, if you speak into the side, it's listening to what's coming in from the speakers. That's feedback, when the microphone and the speakers hear the same thing at the same time. So just keep it in the hand, keep it right on your chin, and speak right over it. It needs to be close, not far away. I mean that. Like when I do this with a microphone like that, that silver ring in the middle will rest right on my chin. The other one, which I think is the worst thing in the world, but we all have them, are the podium microphones that you see at every conference. I think it's adorable when people get up and they put that thing as far as humanly possible from their face and wonder why no one can hear them. You just point it at your mouth, pull it down, adjust the neck. Don't grab it by the foamy bit. Grab that bit in the middle right here that looks like a smooth metal stick. Use that to move it around, or the bit above it. Don't grab it by the head because it'll make all sorts of weird noise. You want it to be about 2 hand widths away from your face. But what you need to remember to do is you need to remember, and this will go for the lavalier mics too, and this is what people forget, is you have to pivot around it as you speak. With a microphone like this, when you're giving a talk and you want to look over your shoulder at the slides that you're giving, you can't do that. You have to treat that as the center of your world. And when you go, you actually peek around it to go and look at it. You have to move your whole body to keep your mouth pointing at that microphone all the time. So otherwise, it's just like, you know, a racetrack where you got everything going fine, and then everything comes right back. The last one that we're gonna, I think we might have one more after this. We do have one more after this. But anyway, this is a lavalier mic, or a lapel mic, as some of you may think of it is. And I say it's not a lapel mic because that's not where it goes. It is not supposed to go on your lapel, and it's supposed to be centered on your body, roughly the third shirt button down. If you're wearing a tie, clip it to the tie and the shirt so it doesn't flop around. The top of it points to your face. Avoid pinning it to the collars. And if you have long hair worn down, it is especially important to either put your hair back or to make sure it is centered on your body. Otherwise, the hair hits the microphone and makes a lot of noise. If you don't have a pocket, hold that battery pack in your hand. Do not set it on the podium, because what you'll inevitably do, since you're nervous, like we talked about earlier, is you'll go to walk away and the whole thing will flop onto the ground. This is a bad thing. So hold it in your hand or put it in a pocket. Same thing with the microphone goes as this. You are now stuck in one shape when you have this microphone on, and that is facing forward. The minute you turn your head, again, it's gone. So turn your entire body if you need to move. Think of it as though your neck and head are fused. You cannot turn your neck, you have to turn your entire body. This will keep the sound going to the microphone, and you don't just have everything you just said lost. Last thing you have is a boundary mic or an omnidirectional mic we talked about for a second. You will rarely ever see these because they are horribly prone to feedback for people that don't use them. There's a minimum distance away from your face, about 2 feet. But most importantly with these, if you do see something like this, is not to bump, tap, hit, or touch the table or podium, because it rattles the entire thing. And to make sure that your laptop or your monitor doesn't cover it, because it can only, again, pick up what's going toward it. I'm glad these things are going away because they're really not good for people that don't do this sort of thing all the time. So feedback. This is what happens if you've taken none of what I just said to heart and break all of the rules. You will never really get feedback. It only happens when you turn the gain way up on the microphone or your microphone is very close to the speakers. If you're holding or wearing a mic, all you do is back up. Know where your speakers are and back away from them. It'll usually stop or turn off the microphone if you can. Don't grab and cover the mic. It makes it worse. It's kind of like, you know, trying to put your hand over a leaky pipe that's blowing water out of it. It just sprays water everywhere. It's the same thing. You need to turn off the faucet. So just back up. When you're in these big rooms, someone is always on the other end of that microphone usually and can turn it down. If you're not, you just need to back up and then speak louder. Okay, so that's a bit about mics, and I see there might be some questions coming in that I can't see, but we'll get to them in a second. All right, this is the other thing. Call it the laser pointer. I can't stand these things. I use them from time to time because I'm asked to, but I really don't like them. Avoid them if you can. People tend to circle things. You use it to keep yourself on track, or if you're super nervous, the whole thing kind of bounces a little bit up on the screen and then everybody knows it and then you feel worse and it gets even crazier. It's not helping any. Underlining these words while reading them and painting like that is just not a great idea. The words are there. People can read them. That's what they have to look at. They can see what you're reading and what they should read. They're used to it. Let them read. If you absolutely have to, use 2 hands. If you do feel super nervous and you're shaky, just to control it. Presenting software like PowerPoint has tons of things for drawing attention. I really like things like boxes over the slide of the things that you want to note, or colorful words, or you can get nuts with blinking, or really anything. And just remember that today, like I said, LCD TVs, you really can't use them at all since they don't reflect the light. So it's best to start building your talks to break these habits now. I think with Zoom, I think many of us have gotten out of these habits of how to use, being in situations where you have to use pointers, but just keep working on it to be there. So there's one more thing I want to share about design and layout. It's about images from the web. We all find these papers with these great pathways and so on, and you just grab the JPEG and you throw it in your talk. Please, for the love of God and everything, stop taking images from Google. Don't do it. Go to the original paper or website, get the PDF or the original image, and take it from there. You either copy the image directly from the PDF, or you zoom way in as far as you can and take a giant screenshot of it to get a TIFF image, or a JPEG is fine there, but you need a minimum resolution of 1000 by 1000. When you're taking it off of the internet and they're small little pictures, you're maybe looking at 150 by 200. It's going to be pixelated on your screen. And I have seen images that are completely incoherent when taken this way in big talks. If you want to know how to put it in, you want to make sure that when you are pasting images into your PowerPoint, you always paste special and paste as a PDF. You don't want to paste as a drawing, a Microsoft image or a JPEG or any of it, and turn off every sort of image compression ever that PowerPoint tries to do, because they will just make it ugly, and paste them in that way so they're PDFs. And if you're making drawings, you can make them in PowerPoint because that, stays relatively, resolution is kept, but try to use a vector-based program like Illustrator, or there's some other free ones. Vector-based means you're not pixels that are colored. It's a line that is programmed in to be a vector that tells it what the size is. And it doesn't matter if it's huge or small, the vector stays the same. So use things like Illustrator to do it. So yeah, microphones and pointers and all of these tools are great if used properly, and they're really nothing to be afraid of. So neither are cameras. As I've been forgetting to do this, I try to talk to the camera so you can see my eyes instead of to my screen. But all these things, just a little bit of practice, like all of it, a little bit of practice really brings it together well to use these tools in an effective way, so people don't remember you're not being able to hear you. When it comes to the theater, I always say, I know I did my job right when nobody knows that I did my job. And it's the same thing. You want people to leave there with your science in their mind, not whether or not they could hear you.